The next criminal element is causation. Causation is easiest to think about if you think about it linking the action to the result or to the harm. We'll use the word in the next segment talking about the result of an offense. Certain offenses require a result to be produced before the offense exists. So causation is linking the offender's actions or the actor's actions to that necessary result. So that when we have a required result and an offender's actions, but they aren't caused, they aren't linked together, then you wouldn't have the necessary elements of that crime. So it would be something other than a crime or some lesser crime. So as an example of how we link action and result is something in Texas we call a but-for test. And we say something like, but for the defendant's actions, the result would not have been produced. If I hadn't put the gun on the in the victim's face and pulled the trigger, the victim would not have died. Very simple, right? So sometimes you have what we call as concurrent causes, and they get really complicated. Luckily enough, they're rare enough that we don't have to deal with them all that much in the classroom. But a concurrent cause is something that is also likely to produce the result. And the easiest way to look at it in Texas is whether or not the actor's cause, the original cause, is sufficient to produce the result. And if it's sufficient to produce the result, then you're typically going to have causation. So if I use an example of a barroom fight and the actor punches another person, throws him through a plate glass window, and a shard of that glass is lodged in the back of the victim's head, and he suffers either permanent brain damage, serious bodily injury, death. We would look at the circumstances under the but-for test and say, had his actions not occurred, the person wouldn't have been injured or wouldn't have died. Very simple. But let's say he throws him through the window, and instead of a shard of glass getting stuck in his neck or his head, he stands up, and as he stands up, a car coming through the parking lot hits him and runs him over, and he dies. So the thing we look at for an instance that has multiple causes, an actor's cause and a concurrent cause, is whether the first point, the actor's cause, is sufficient to produce the result. So we would look at throwing someone through a window, is that sufficient to cause death? And it may be some instances with some circumstances it would be. But in this circumstance, it would not. You throw them through the window, maybe they're cut, they're scraped, but it's not sufficient to produce the result, which is death. So then you have to look at the concurrent cause. And we would say if the original cause, the actor's cause, is insufficient to produce the result, and the concurrent cause is sufficient to produce the result, then the concurrent cause produced the result, and the actor's cause did not. So even though I throw somebody through a plate glass window, the window of a bar, they would not have been in that position had it not been for me. If they got run over by a car, the car is sufficient to kill them. My throwing them through the window was not sufficient to kill them. So it would not be that particular offense of murder. Could it be another offense like assault or destruction of property? Of course. But it wouldn't be murder because I did not cause the death of that person. But let's say, for example, that I stab someone, and then on the way to the hospital in an ambulance, they are maybe it's a survivable injury, maybe it's not, maybe it's unknown. But on the way to the hospital, the ambulance is T-boned by a tractor trailer, and the victim dies as a result of the car wreck. And of course, in an autopsy, we could look at that and say, the death was produced by the car wreck. But we go back to the actor's cause, and but for my actions, would he have been in the ambulance? In that instance, my action is sufficient to produce the result. If I stab someone, that is a sufficient behavior to produce the result of death. So even though the car accident is what actually killed the victim, I could still be held liable under the murder statute for causing his death.